Okay, welcome. This is part 3 of our chapter on lifespan development. So let's go a little bit further here. So we're taking a look at, some of the factors in development through the lifespan, through the early part of the lifespan, especially right now. We're talking about infants, and early childhood so far. So definitely, we're going to take a look at from where we left off. We're going to take a look at some of the things, in this respect, science versus pseudoscience. So those pseudoscience, you may be familiar with that term from Psychology 101. So pseudoscience is basically scientific, quasi-scientific claims, without appropriate types of evidence. Okay. And one of, an example of those, especially, since we're talking about young children, infants, babies, and that kind of things, are things like, can we make babies develop into little geniuses, by listening to Mozart music, that kind of thing, so there are definitely DVDs available, CDs and things like that, where there's, they play music from Mozart, and they say, hey, this is going to make your baby's brain develop much faster, and that kind of thing. But keep in mind, that's more of a pseudoscientific claim. There's been no evidence, and it's not supported by neuroscientists, so to speak. So that's just an example. Okay, going forward. All right. So when it comes to talking about, the development of babies' brains and everything, there's also some types of there are certain types of people, who think that, if we just play a lot of videos, that the baby's brain will develop, and a little more significantly, a little more efficiently, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, neuroscience doesn't support that claim either. That it's not, it's not the passive interaction with the environment that actually causes, significant changes in the human brain. It's actually more of a kind of a positive interaction, so to speak, with the environment. So things like significantly more learning occurs in the context of everyday parent-child interactions than in front of television screens. So, definitely engaging the babies. Actually, this, applies to all humans, but the more senses are involved in our social interaction or our interaction with the environment, we tend to learn more as a result. Okay, so very quickly we're going to take a look at, what happens, if there are issues with the development of the brain, and the child actually starts showing signs of what we call autism. But psychologists now, they actually say, look, autism, actually occurs on what they call the spectrum. It's actually a spectrum, from very mild to very, very severe. And so it can be anywhere in between those two phases. Okay? So autism spectrum disorder, that's developmental disorder, and that's when individuals, when babies, they have a hard time communicating and interacting, okay, with others. Okay? So, they may, so as an example of autism spectrum disorder, would be like, say, the mother or somebody tries talking to the baby, but the baby doesn't respond at all. It just stares straight ahead, and it's more focused on one of its toys or something, and it doesn't respond to other types of social types of prompts or environmental type things. so to speak. Okay, so remember I mentioned, that like, look, on as far as the spectrum is concerned, well, there are various phases, there are different points on the spectrum that an individual may demonstrate and experience. So some, autistic spectrum disorder type individuals, they may be what's known as autistic savants, so they have, some extraordinary talent or ability, but usually in a very limited area. So take, for instance, they may be what we may call something like a musical genius. They're able to hear something one time and then play it on the piano, but yet in other areas of life, they are not quite so efficient. And so that's just an example, okay? Okay, but we have to keep in mind when it comes to things like autism, there are many causes and origins of that and things affecting that, that disorder, okay? And those can be genetic and environmental, okay? And they can also keep in mind, taking that a little bit further, it's not only biological and environmental factors, but, another biological factor can be, structurally speaking, can be an issue with communication between both hemispheres of the brain through the corpus callosum. And individuals that may experience that type of factor may be on the spectrum, so to speak. Okay, so we're going to go up to the next phase of development, and we're going to talk about adolescence. And that's what we tend to just call teenagers. Okay, now adolescence, remember that's a transitional phase between childhood and adulthood. Okay, and so I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. Okay, so feel free to stop and look a little more in depth, at the video at your own speed, so to speak. Okay, all right, at your own tempo. Okay, so during adolescence, most biophysiologists, they say, look, that's when sexual maturity is reached, so keep in mind, that sexual and physical maturation, that's the result of hormonal type processes. And in general, girls are usually a couple years ahead of boys as far as hormonal type processes that cause sexual and physical maturation, okay? So we can see here that these individuals right here might be the same, from the same family, but this girl, she's basically a lot more physically developed than this young boy. It's just an example. Okay. So basically, I mentioned, as far as hormonally speaking, that refers to what we call puberty. Okay. When an individual reaches, sexual maturity and they become, physiologically capable of sexual reproduction. Okay. So there are different types of sex characteristics. Okay. I'm going to move through these kind of quickly. Okay, there's what we call primary sex characteristics, and basically that just refers to our specific organs, sexual organs, okay? And then there's secondary sex characteristics, basically, everything that's not directly involved with reproduction, but help us, differentiate between the sexes. So things, like, here's a couple examples, like male facial hair and female breast development, that kind of thing. Those are secondary sex characteristics because those are not directly involved with the sexual reproductive type processes. Okay? And individuals, adolescents, they usually go through what's called the growth spurt. Okay? And so during puberty, they tend to, increase rapidly in height and weight. Okay? It's just some examples there. And so this is just a summarization. This is a visual type aid here for you to look at your own pace. Okay? Moving forward. So there are various factors, and this is where this is from a psychological standpoint, and especially as far as developmental psychology is concerned, that psychologists are very concerned with the factors that affect things, like timing of puberty and everything. So here's some examples, whether the father is absent or present in the home environment. Okay, so it affects hormonal type processes in development in individuals. Okay, the quality of family relationship, genetics. See, so here we talked a little bit about the social, and then when we get into the genetics, we're talking about the biological factors. Okay, and as well as now we're looking into the environmental, nutrition and health. That's the social. Okay, so whenever we're talking about the environment, we're talking about the social perspective. Okay, just wanted a gentle reminder there. Okay. So a couple of answers to some questions, that we get pretty often in this class, things like hormones and things, but I'm going to actually focus on this second answer right here, second point. And it's what refers to neuronal pruning. Okay, so during adolescence, neuronal pruning, remember that just refers to the process when neurons are actually pruned down. They are cut or eliminated from and that, keep in mind though, that's not a negative thing. So what happens is nature says, okay, we want the brain to start functioning better. It needs to function more efficiently. And it needs to function better as it develops more into formal operational type stages or something like that, And so basically what it does is the pruning of neurons that are not used very often and everything, that is actually happens in order to make more space for communication between more active neurons to connect and communicate with each other. Okay, so that is more, it's for more positive type reasons than it is negative. So this pruning here, please, don't react in a negative emotional type way to that term, okay? That's just something that's just very common. It happens in all humans. Okay, now within the brain here, just want to make you aware of the fact that there's what they call the second wave. So gray matter actually starts starting to develop in the brain. There's like an overproduction just before puberty. And so that is why the brain has to start doing the neuronal pruning in order to make room for that new gray matter, as well as I said before, helping the individual to engage in more efficient, logical type thinking processes. Okay. And so as a quick reminder, just want to keep reminding you of this. You probably heard this in Psychology 101 a few times from me. And I said, look, keep in mind that prefrontal cortex, it reaches full maturity somewhere by the mid-20s. So students are usually kind of surprised and kind of saddened to hear this if they're not in their mid-20s already. Like, I thought I was fully mature by this point. But it's usually by the mid-20s, human beings reach full cortical maturity by that age. So I just want a quick reminder of that, okay? Now this is just for you to pause the video and take a look at, okay? Become acquainted with this. All right, same with this. Feel free to pause the video and take a look at this. I'm not going to cover all this in a lot of detail. Okay, now when it comes to social development throughout development, okay, social development basically, well, it's important to keep in mind that from a social perspective, the parent and child relationships, you know, positive parent-child relationships are very important, both biologically, psychologically, and socially. That can affect how an individual interacts and actually grows throughout the lifespan. Now, it kind of goes without saying, though, that definitely during this phase of development, you know, one's friends and peers, you know, become very influential, become very important, you know, so that kind of goes without saying. But we have to keep in mind here, we should not pass judgment on that, because the interaction with one's friends and peers, that's an important part of development. Cortically speaking, socially speaking, you know, psychologically, neurobiologically speaking, all of this is so very important to interact with one's friends and peers. One is learning a lot, and one is learning about themselves, developing a sense of purpose and self-identity. Okay. Okay. So as we talked about earlier on in one of the first video that we were looking at through this chapter, we said, well, look, you know, there are multiple phases of development, right, or stages of development. Well, those are due to this individual right here, this developmental psychologist named Erikson. Okay, so John Erikson here, you know, he he posited that as individuals develop through the lifespan, well, they actually develop in what he called 8 phases, psychosocial stages. Okay, and so in each phase of development, an individual might be dealing with a problem or a crisis that they need to resolve in their specific phase of development. And once they're able to resolve that problem or crisis, then they're able to progress into the next phase of development. Now keep in mind, this person right here, if you take developmental psychology and look into it a little further and want to take Psychology 235 with me, you will hear this very, very often, this name, Erikson. Okay? Very influential and very important to developmental psychology. Okay, so moving forward here, I'm not going to read this or anything. Feel free, though, if these are the stages, Erikson's stages of development. Okay, we don't have to go into too much detail right now on all these, but please pause the video if you would like to take a look at these a little more in depth. Okay. Now, other psychologists, they were more concerned with, well, they focused their research on, well, how do individuals develop as far as their morals, their moral reasoning and everything. So this person, Kohlberg, was a very influential developmental psychologist, okay? And he also said there's distinct stages of moral development. Okay, now here's the various stages right here, what he called pre-conventional, stages 1 and 2. And basically stage 1, you know, that means, well, as far as moral type reasoning goes, well, being right, engaging in right, or a positive type behavior, that means just obeying the rules and simply avoiding, in order to avoid punishment, okay, which would, most children, they are in stage 1 of this phase of moral development. Moving on to stage 2, though, is what he called mutual benefit. So right moral behavior and thinking, well, that's starting to develop the idea that, well, both parties can benefit. So it's more what we call, positive type social interaction. Okay, stage 3 of Kohlberg's moral development. Okay, and that is interpersonal expectations. So right morals, are associated with, well, being a good person. So when one is able to start thinking that way, like, hey, I just want to be a good person, I want to engage in more pro-social type thinking and behavior, well, that is stage 3, interpersonal expectations. Stage 4 of Kohlberg's levels of moral development, well, that means helping to maintain social order by doing one's duty, obeying laws, just because, it's important to obey law, things like that, respect for authorities and things like that. So that is the 4 phases according to Kohlberg. But later on, there was a few other things, a few other stages that were added on to this. And so basically protecting the rights of all people, being fair, being just, being equal, democracy, things like that. Well, that is stage 5. Stage 6, being a little more universal moral principles. That's, being right, that's determined by, self-chosen principles. So like being non-violent, being, treating all people equal, things like that. I know this gets a bit rigorous, but trying to not spend too much time on any of these. Okay. This is just more for visual type information. So going forward here. And I'm going past the moral reasoning, okay, because we've covered that pretty well. Okay, now we're going to start taking a look at adult development. Okay, so in regard to adult development, well, basically, big physical changes, right? As well as being able to starting to explore one's, coming up with a stronger sense of one's self-identity. What are you going to do in life? What am I going to, what do I want to do for a career? How do I want to have a family? That kind of thing. That's more adult type considerations. Okay, so just some questions, all right. Now you notice right here, though, on this first question, I used the term emerging adulthood. So that's not, that's more of a transitional phase, between adolescence and becoming a full adult. So, it's safe to, also use the term maybe a young adult or something like that. But emerging adult is a little more accurate. So emerging adulthood, that's somewhere between, the late teens to the mid to late 20s, etc. So you can see that's more of a transitional phase. You're not quite a teenager, but you're not quite a full adult yet. So hence transitional. And so you can see I wrote, it's characterized, by exploration, instability, flexibility in social roles, things like that, vocational choices, etc., etc. So basically, during that transitional phase, that's just finding oneself, being able to finding what one is going to do with one's life, How does one feel? What does one stand for? Etc., etc. So this is not important, so I'm going to proceed. Okay, but feel free to stop and look at this if you like. Okay, so proceeding here. So when we get into into adulthood, between the 20s and 30s, individuals, they have grown more physically. They have evolved a little more cognitively speaking. Okay. And so as they get older, between the 30s and the 50s, what can be, women are, engage in what's called menopause. Okay, that's when they stop menstruating. And so they're not able to reproduce any longer. Okay, but this is what, going a little bit further, students are usually surprised to learn that men have a certain kind of menopause as well. And that's what's called andropause. And so that doesn't mean, they're not able to reproduce, or et cetera, but it does mean that they experience a gradual decline in their testosterone. Okay, so that's just something to focus on, broader, in a more broad conceptual way, that not only women experience menopause, but so do men, which is called andropause. Okay, so during what's called, middle adulthood, middle-aged, we usually use that term, middle age. Well, individuals start becoming a little more focused on, well, they've kind of done what they want to do, or they're in the process of doing what they want to do in life and everything, and they start becoming a little more focused on younger generations, and they want to help younger generations, and that's what's known as generativity. Okay, contributing to younger generations. Okay, so like focusing, helping children, grandchildren, that kind of thing. So moving forward here, I'm going to actually skip forward here. All right. We're almost done with this, everybody, so just hang in there. We're almost through this, okay, with this video. Okay, so we're going to proceed at a little quicker level and get through this a little quicker, okay? All right. Okay, we're not worried about childcare, but we're going to take a look at late adulthood and aging. So late adulthood doesn't mean that they necessarily, experience a steep decline in their physical or cognitive capabilities, but they are going through some changes for sure, Okay, so what cognitive changes take place in late adulthood? So when one becomes an older person, what do they experience? Okay, and what factors influence their social development as well? Okay, so we're going to take a look at this, so basically I'm going to skip to the bottom here and focus on what I feel is most important for you to focus on. Okay, now in late adulthood, activity theory, okay, so that just means being very active in everything. Well, life satisfaction as well as overall health and everything, the more active an individual is throughout late adulthood, the healthier overall they are. Okay. Okay, and when it comes to keeping one's cognitive abilities, as well as, not only from the cognitive perspective, whereas cognitive processes or mental processes is concerned, but from the biophysical perspective as well. We have to keep in mind, things like aerobic exercise, that improves, can help aging adults engage in more stronger cognitive type processes. Okay. And that's the result. The reason why is because more, the aerobic exercise, actually facilitates more blood flow into the brain, which keeps the brain a little more physically healthy, so to speak, and more active. Okay, moving forward here. So some statistics here, and we don't have to worry about all this too much, all right? But feel free to pause the video and take a look on your own. We're almost there, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to summarize in late adulthood, some individuals, they may experience, as their abilities start to decline a little bit, they're experiencing some changes in their body and their cognitive functioning and stuff. They become a little more, withdrawn, isolated, disengaged, okay? And so basically, if they're living on their own, they start not interacting with other people as quite like they used to when they were younger. Okay, we're almost there, everybody. So when it comes to death and dying, okay, and I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. I don't mean to focus too much on negative type, emotional type processes here or anything. But basically, these people, Kubler and Ross, they describe the stages of dying, okay? Okay, so, they talked about things like, well, one's realizes they're probably, on their way to dying, they're getting older and they're dying, they may go through these stages, denial, and then anger. And then once they've gotten through that, they may start bargaining, and they may experience depression. But last but not least, though, they hopefully will get into the stage of acceptance. It will just say, look, this is where I'm headed, and I accept that, and it's been a good life, and I'm grateful for everything I've done and been through, etc., etc. Now, every human being doesn't necessarily go through every single one of these phases. Just would like for you to understand that. Okay. So I'm going to very briefly go through this last bit here. We have 2 slides left to do in this video, okay? Different parenting styles, okay? So I know this is kind of going back to something, but this is more for adults, who are parents and everything to be aware of. Okay, there are different parenting styles for raising psychologically healthy children. Okay, there's what's known as authoritarian parenting style. That's being very demanding and unresponsive to their children's needs. Basically do as I say, not as I do type parenting. There's permissive parenting style. Basically, they are responsive, warm, and accepting, but they don't really give rules, to their children. They don't really guide them through decision making, that kind of thing. They say, hey, my child, I'll just let them do it as they figure it out, so to speak. Okay? And then there is what's called authoritative parenting style, which tends to be a little more in the middle between the 2 extremes we mentioned earlier. Okay? That means engaging with the children, talking with them, setting standards, that kind of thing. Okay, so when it comes to being a good authoritative parent, okay, so let your children know that you love them, listen to them, okay. A few other examples here, but this is, I'll let you look at this on your own, okay. So that concludes our discussion on the lifespan. So I hope this has been insightful, and we'll see you on the next chapter.